welcome back to part two of our special episode spotlighting the incredible poet Jannine Horsford. In the last episode, we explored her journey and her passion for words and how her craft is shaping, you know, culture in the region. Today, we will dive deeper into her creative process, the power of poetry as a tool for self expression, more insight into her craft, and her vision for inspiring Caribbean voices. Let's continue this inspiring conversation here on season 5, episode 2, From Caribbean Roots to Jurassic Coast.
Is a difficult space to inhabit.
What
mean,
do you
there.
think is difficult? What about it is difficult?
Because just in terms of the opportunities, so I won this fellowship, right? And I think it was really well conceived. But what else is there? There's so little else, right? Is there even an arts council in Trinidad and Tobago? Do we have access to grants? Do we have the ability to partner? And by we, I mean, I'm speaking particularly with reference to young writers, young in quotation marks, emerging writers. What concrete opportunities exist in this space? I think about all the tertiary level institutions and how good it would be if they would partner with artists, providing residencies, whether for a short or an extended time. There's nothing like that here. And so you're existing in a space that is so extremely challenging and can also challenge one's, have an effect on one's mental and emotional health because you're existing here. But what future is there in this space for you is, it's certainly one of the things which you're always contending as a Caribbean writer. Right?
So your work has had global reach. You've been in literary magazines, publishing. You have diverse publications from the Caribbean Writer to Manchester Review. So how do you, balance writing both for a Caribbean and an international audience?
To be honest, I haven't published, I think, as much as I should or could have, because this has always been a concern. But I intend to change that. I think there are certain markets though that are they kind of prioritize authenticity, and even if you have a body of work that may be a little different or a little unique, it can find a home, but it takes a lot of time and it involves a lot of rejection. And it's something which I don't think I ought, to be honest, I always deal well with. But I think I'm getting there, getting there slowly as well. But I think if your work, if you are a committed poet and you have strong work and you have a certain voice, with time and dedication, you can find, an audience abroad as well. But it admittedly takes time.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the reality of it, that it's not gonna just be an easy road for people.
Sure.
You will have to deal with rejection, as I suppose everything in life that is worth it. I always think of poets and writers, and even myself, if you do something, it doesn't even have to be writing, that you put a lot of time and effort into, because you spoke about some of these poems in development in 2002, 2004, to then hear somebody say, well, no, we're not accepting it. I always imagine poets, it's very hard, maybe more than a novelist, I would say, forgive me, novelists, that poetry is such an emotional thing. It comes from such an emotional place and space that you're trying to get all of this emotion out in a short space of time with as few words as
Sure.
possible I could possibly say.
Sure.
And then to hear somebody rejected, that is
Yeah.
something I
Yeah.
imagine you'd have to develop a
Yeah.
tough skin for.
Yeah. And I mean, good thing. So that this is where um interacting with other poets comes in, because you think, okay, you've had 5 or 6 rejections this year, and you talk to someone who will tell you 5 or 6, please. I have, had 20, I've submitted 20 poems, sorry, and had 1 or 2 accepted, or 3, so the context is always good. It's always good.
And with these rejections, is there feedback, or is it just, well, no, your piece does not suit us? It's
Right. That's a good
you
question.
give feedback in terms of what you can improve on for next time around.
Generally, there's no feedback. I think perhaps on just 2 or 3 occasions, if so many have received feedback, usually it's just um, sometimes a very curt statement. I've been told your work is not for us. So whatever. I guess, as you said, you have to really develop a thick skin, because some of them can be quite brutal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Fine.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you approach placing your poems in these different markets? I know you said you made it very clear that it's going to be a challenge and a struggle to kind of get that out there, but what is your approach to that, getting it in these different markets?
Yeah. I think generally I kind of so I have access to some resources that I use, like websites and so on, that they would like advertise submission calls for specific magazines and so on. And so I would read like the short introduction of the specific magazine or whatever. And then I would try to read their work, see who is published, etc. And see if my kind of aesthetic fits in
Right.
with theirs as well. And that works fairly well. But I know that as an emerging writer, I need to do more of this, and perhaps do it in an even more methodical way, right? Yeah.
So have you noticed any shifts in how Caribbean poetry is received internationally, during your publishing journey?
Um, that's a good question. I think there are certain movements now, and there are younger poets who are writing in a very specific way, a very interesting way. And perhaps there's more available, more open, more opportunities for the Caribbean poet. There's that, but at the same time, I feel as if there's not enough of it. And I think that's why there is a need, I think, for us to do some of that ourselves in this region, in terms of, the publishing houses. How many publishing houses exist here that really publish Caribbean poetry, etc.
Do you see yourself as representing, a Caribbean voice when you write your poetry?
That's a good question. As representing a Caribbean voice, I don't think I am always doing this consciously.
Right.
I think essentially poetry is a place of conversation. The poem, sorry, is a place of conversation. And so perhaps at that level, I am always engaging with other poems, other poets, Caribbean poetry. But is it something that I am always conscious of? Not necessarily so, because then it can become a bit oppressive. But I'm also conscious of the way in which I think some of my poetry is different from other poems I've read as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, I think people have their unique style, which is what distinguishes Walcott from a Carter or anybody else, any other poet that we've read, you know. I'm interested to know, and I think I would ask you because you've chosen to publish in this way in hard copy and go through Pikash Press and, you know, a publishing house and those sort of things. But many others may be turning to Amazon or they may be publishing on Hello Poetry and Wattpad and all of these things. What is your poetry.com? You know, what was your rationale or justification for producing this way in hard copy and not on, you know, a digital site, we'll say?
Right. Well, very practically, so the publication of the chapbook was the last one of the prizes, right? So apart from the mentorship and so on, this was one of the prizes. And you know, obviously after doing, so there was an Avon course, mentorship, etc. And this was certainly the last stage, publishing this book. But I consider myself as well perhaps old-fashioned in that regard, in that this is the medium I am most comfortable with.
And I think out there's always that debate because myself as a reader, I still prefer the organic thing of holding texture wise an actual book
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
that
Sure.
you can carry around. I mean, people might say you can do that on your phone or your device by reading it online.
Right.
The fact that you know you annotate there, even though you can do it online, because I've done it
Mm-hmm.
in reading your poems, I put my own little thoughts next to
Okay.
what I
Okay.
read that
Interesting.
came out, my own little
Mm-hmm.
allusions that may jump out or seeing if there are
Sure.
connections between things there. So there is
Sure.
something to that. But at least I'm glad to hear that we do have something in the Caribbean that we have for poets to be able to publish and prizes to win to get the
Mm.
outcome like
Sure.
this. Do
Sure.
you have other published works out there besides Jurassic Coast?
No, so this is actually, yeah, I mean, I've published, as I said, as you have said as well, in journals, magazines, etc. But this is, you know, first length publication, you could say. But at the moment I am working on editing the full length collection, which is actually taking much longer than expected. But certainly editing it um with a view to sending it out to publishers, to finding a publisher this year.
And in terms of Pikash Press, that's a publisher as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fine.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you talked about your revision process, which you are currently engaged in, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
earlier you talked to reference one of the, I guess, the poets that you admire, and you said you clearly see that he spends a good bit of time doing his editing
Mm-hmm.
and revision to produce the kind of work that you
Mm-hmm.
describe as near perfect. So, what does
Mm-hmm.
your revision process look like for your poems?
Right. So I am, to be honest, I am not sure it's the same process for every poem. I think some poems are easier, and there's some poems that tend to come out very organically, practically whole, right? Um, and so that's fine, perhaps. But sometimes you think it has come out whole, and then someone reads it for you, and you know that raises a whole, you know, lot of different questions and so on. But I think I edit significantly. I find that I cannot effectively edit the poem on the screen. So I print, make corrections, print constantly. Perhaps I'm overdoing it. I think I'm doing quite a lot of it now. Um, but I have also begun of late to take photos of poems, because I find when I take a picture of it and I read it on my phone, it allows me to engage with the poem in a different way as well. So I've been doing different things. Um, but I spend a lot of time editing. I somehow think though, to be honest, that there are other methods of editing that I may have to learn. I think I think I've exhausted some of the means that I'm using currently, and there are other means that exist out there that, I have to learn about and apply as well. But, I am doing currently a lot of line by line editing of the diction, of the form of the poem on the page, and so on.
So two things coming out. I do want to ask you about whether your form and structure is deliberate in terms of how play some of these poems in terms of the lines running on, running into each other, that sort of thing. But
Right.
I want to stick with editing for a while. I know many people, many writers would hire an editor, but you are speaking about editing the process for yourself, which I am certain all writers do to some extent, but do you hire a separate editor to edit the works?
Right. And that is an option. I don't think it's an option that's available to me at the moment, but I know many people do. And I know as well, that once I submit the work to a publisher, then it will go through another process of editing as well. Right. But certainly people hire editors to edit their work.
But you use yours through the publisher, basically.
Yeah. I've Well, this is what I'm doing currently. I hope I'm doing it successfully, right? I can only hope
But
at this stage.
I mean, yes, you said you've only published Jurassic Coast in terms of this format, but in terms of publishing in magazines, I'm curious to know what the other side of the editing looks like for you, the writer, to say, okay, did they keep my voice true? Did they keep what I intended to do with this piece or line, true?
Sure.
For you.
I mean, from my experience, once a publisher accepts the work, most times it remains as is what I have found in my experience. I have had publishers or editors, sorry, magazine editors suggest very small changes, but yeah, nothing major. I've had a title or two changed, but usually nothing major. Yeah. I mean, in my experience.
So what about your future projects? Is the extended version of your chapbook that we should look forward to? What's in store for Jannine Horsford?
So I'm currently working on the long length, the full length collection. Wrapping it up hopefully. And I I have written poems, as I said, about the second year I spent in England, but I also write prose. The difficult thing though is that I find it very challenging, near impossible to write poetry and prose at the same time. And so, I have prioritized poetry, and with the hopes that in future I will begin to write on or to edit the prose that I've written, because I've written a significant, substantial number of short stories and novellas, but I know they require a lot of work, a lot of editing and rewriting and so on. So.
Do you do this full time?
No, I don't, because it doesn't pay. Right. And
it's much, but I want people to hear the reality of it. I think most this is not sustainable long.
Let me correct that. Yeah, let me correct that. I mean, at this point, as an emerging writer in the Caribbean, with little access to grants, etc., I am dedicating quite a lot of time to writing, more than I've ever done in my life, because I've always taught, and in between marking papers, I've written overnight and so on. Now I am spending a lot more time writing than I've ever done before. But to consider myself a full-time writer, I expect to be there, all things being equal, in a few years, right? But it's not there. It's not what obtains currently at all.
and hopefully my listeners will also continue to support you and get a copy of Jurassic Coast at the
Thank
paper
you so much.
store, Alcazar Street. Yes? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so thank you, Jannine Horsford, poet and writer, for joining us here on Lana the Educator. I want my listeners to know that you empower minds and you ignite curiosity. Thank you, Jannine.
Thank you. You're most welcome. Thanks so much. It has been a pleasure.